Our world is a dynamic, ever-changing society. We're advancing at such a rapid pace that it's actually harder and harder to keep up. Today, we can't imagine that 50 years from now the world will look the same. In fact, we're progressing so fast now that it's quite difficult to predict the future even 30 years from now. But this wasn't always the case. Travel back some 300 years and you'll find that the vast majority of people expected the world to remain unchanged. So, what happened? At the end of the 18th century, there was something going on in Great Britain. Something that would spread throughout the globe and change the Western world from a rural, stagnant society into a modern, urban civilization. This is the story of the Industrial Revolution. Hello, and welcome to 7 Fact. The Industrial Revolution was a sudden change of pace in how our economics worked. It wasn't one single event, but a sequence of technological innovations, social changes, and unprecedented economical growth. It all started in Britain, a country fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. This country had an abundance of the resources that kickstarted the revolution: coal, iron, and waterways. There was also a lot of capital, an increasingly larger and richer middle class, all of whom were seeking ways to invest their fortune. And to top it all off, Britain was the proud owner of a vast global empire that was bringing in a lot of resources while at the same time acting as the perfect market for British products. Because of this, Great Britain was the uncontested ruler of the seas, with a vast fleet of commercial vessels that sailed to every corner of the world. The signs that something was about to happen were beginning to show. In 1771, Richard Arkwright used his skills to build a water-action spinning frame to process cotton at Cromford, Derbyshire. Basically, he was the first man to build a mechanized factory. Such innovations started to pop up elsewhere too, but they didn't seem that big of a deal. One such invention was the steam engine, invented by Thomas Newcomen in 1712. Called the atmospheric engine, it was created to pump water out of mines. This invention, although useful, didn't change the world. Until, that is, James Watt made some modifications 60 years later, transforming the steam engine into the catalyst that would power water pumps, factory machines, locomotives, and steamers. By 1804, Richard Trevithick took a high-pressure steam engine and put it on wheels, giving birth to the first ever locomotive. 26 years later, the Rocket became the first ever passenger train connecting Liverpool and Manchester. Few people probably noticed that the world would never be the same again. The outrageous efficiency of steam engines in factories compared to manual labor led to a huge demand in coal. Using waterways and later locomotives to transport that coal led to a big price drop, so steam engines were becoming more affordable. The development of coke, a type of refined coal that burns at much higher temperatures, then led to a faster, cheaper, more efficient way to produce iron. More and better iron meant more machines, bridges, ships, and railways. Notice the pattern here. It was one innovation that led to the other, all sustaining each other's growth at an increasingly faster pace. In less than 50 years, 2 million tons of iron was used in Britain alone to make 10,000 kilometers of railway. Trains became the literal motor of the Industrial Revolution. They were transporting unimaginable weights across large distances at speeds of up to 65 kilometers per hour. This led to an increased mobility of workers, an explosion of industrial towns and cities, and the establishment of God knows how many factories. With trains connecting so many regions, a new necessity arose: the synchronization of time. Thus, time became standardized, and the GMT, or Greenwich Mean Time, replaced all local time measurements. With mechanized factories and railways and canals spread throughout the country, there was no need to build your factories near the raw materials. Riverbanks, mines and farms ceased to be the prime locations for manufacturing. Cities were now the prime targets, as they had large populations, railway connections and political influence. The textile industry, for instance, was now booming, with hundreds of thousands of looms working non-stop. All these looms needed low-skilled, cheap operators, all of whom you'd find in cities. It all sounds great, but there was a downside to all of this. The Industrial Revolution skyrocketed productivity and led to an unprecedented technological, social and economic leap, but it also brought misery to millions. Countless men, women and even children who had no work in rural areas came to cities in search of a job. This abundance of workforce devalued their worth, so most people worked in horrific conditions throughout the entire day for a miserably low wage. It was because of this that labor unions were created. Slowly and inefficiently, work conditions did improve and laws changed, but most of these laws were blatantly ignored by factory owners and changes for the better were small. However, this is how we got to where we are today, with strict labor laws, health and safety regulations and proper work conditions. Millions of people basically sacrificed their entire lives for us to have these laws, so never take them lightly. But other than this, the Industrial Revolution also eliminated a lot of jobs. Skilled workers were no longer needed, so they became unemployed or worked for a fraction of what they used to make. Many of them decided to fight back. The Luddites were a secret oath-based organization of English textile workers which destroyed textile machinery as a form of protest. They became synonyms with anti-progress radicalism, but they were actually protesting against the use of machinery in fraudulent and deceitful manners. The British government had to send in the troops to shut them down, and to make an example out of them, sentenced 50 Luddites to death or imprisonment in one of Australia's penal colonies. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you something. This channel has no sponsors, so if you enjoy the content I make, please consider supporting these videos by becoming a patron. You can check out my Patreon page by clicking here or find the link in the description. Okay, now we can move on to the next fact. Despite the misery and hardship of millions, the Industrial Revolution didn't stop, and it couldn't be stopped at this point. The first phase of the revolution took place mostly in Great Britain, but also spread to its colonies. British colonies were developing shipyards and steel factories, and the textile industry was also beginning to develop. Other states like Germany were also starting to advance. France kept up with its neighbors until the French Revolution, which halted their progress for a while. In the end, it was Belgium that managed to become the first industrialized country in continental Europe by 1820. But progress wouldn't stop there. The second wave of industrialization saw Germany, Switzerland and the United States soaring towards economic peak. Most of their development was thanks to the finishing of railways that connected different provinces and states. Germany became an industrial powerhouse after the unification of the country in 1871. By the end of the century, both German and American industrial output overtook Britain's. This revolution also brought an end to an age-old practice, serfdom. Serfs were peasants in bondage who were tied to the estate of a landlord and forced to work those lands for life. Now there was little to no need of serfs, so gradually serfdom was abolished in European countries. These people would now soon be the cheap workforce needed by Europe's factories. They would also constitute the basis of European immigrants to America, bringing their skills, cultures and ideas to the New World. As the second wave of the revolution was spreading to other countries, new industries were now also developing. Chemical processes, machine builders and steelworks joined the revolution. Steelworks benefited from Henry Bessemer's invention, a new way of making steel through what is now known as the Bessemer process. Prior to this, engineers were using cast iron with a good resistance to pressure or wrought iron with a good tension resistance. Through the Bessemer process, carbon was greatly reduced from the iron, making steel resistant, malleable, and adaptable. Iron bridges, railways, steel domes, and steel buildings were now a thing. Now trains reached even the far eastern ends of Europe, connecting isolated provinces with the rest of the world. The need for capital led to the explosion of the stock market to practically every corner of Europe and America. On sea, the replacement of sail ships with steamships transformed global commerce. Now raw materials and foods could be bought at the lowest prices possible. The last major step in this revolution was probably the invention of the telegraph and the telephone. Telecommunications enabled companies not only to react instantly to market changes, but it also connected them with suppliers and clients from any corner of the world. To give you an idea of how much the world had changed, let me give you this example. Before the invention of steam locomotives, the fastest vehicle on the planet was a horse-drawn carriage. Their average speed was around 5 to 10 km per hour tops, and every 50 to 60 km horses needed to rest. So this was the top speed of both people and merchandise prior to locomotives. But industrialization changed everything. Agriculture was no longer the world's top priority, cities became the centers of society, and capitalism and consumerism became dominant. After the first two waves of industrialization, there was a global recession, so the spread of progress came to a slowdown. But starting with the 1890s, the third wave began in countries like Russia, Japan, Italy, France, and Sweden. And once again, new industries began to develop. Electrotechnics, the automobile industry, and the weapons industry all joined the club. Henry Bessemer invented his steel production technique while working on the problem of manufacturing cheap steel for ordnance production. Naturally, armies around the world adopted the new techniques and a new race was born, the arms race. The introduction of firearms, heavy artillery, and eventually tanks changed the face of war forever. It was Germany that dominated the weapons industry, which sparked worries in the minds of its neighbors. Russia, France, Britain, and Italy invested huge amounts of money in weapons manufacturing, and Russia in particular rapidly developed a railway system specifically to transport troops to its western borders. Without knowing, they were all setting the stage for what would be one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history, World War I. So, in short, here's the Industrial Revolution. It all began in Great Britain. Previous innovations in food production and the abundance of raw materials gave this country the upper hand. Thanks to its vast empire, the British had access to cheap imports like cotton, silk, and wool, for which creative innovators created new machines and techniques. In 1709, Abraham Darby used coke, a refined type of coal, to produce cheaper, better iron. Later, that iron would be further refined and steel production eventually became cheap and relatively easy. All these raw materials as well as the finished goods had to be transported through the country, so a network of 6,800 kilometers of water canals was built all across Britain. They were replaced by steam locomotives soon enough. Coal-rich regions in the north of England, then Germany, and the United States led to the rapid industrialization of these regions. And from there, an explosion of innovation spread throughout Europe and America. It all started with Richard Arkwright's mechanized factory in Derbyshire in 1771. And, in less than 150 years, industry spread to Europe and America, then to Asia, and it's continuing to spread to all the regions that are yet to develop. I hope this video was interesting enough to have inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. You can leave your comments downstairs, and you can also check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.